Hi, I'm Alex Fumero, and by now you know this podcast, More Than a Movie, is all about American Me. But there's another movie that's very important to this story. No, not Blood In, Blood Out. I'm talking about Lives in Hazard, a documentary filmed behind the scenes of American Me. On paper, American Me was an indie film, meaning there was no major studio behind it. But actually, it was what was known as a negative pickup, meaning the studio had committed to pay for the film, technically, once it was done. I know this because a source who worked on the production told me so, but out of fear of retribution, didn't want their name used. Likewise, movie studios sometimes do this for reasons of liability. They don't want their name on something that could be legally or otherwise dangerous. In this case, the movie studio was Universal Studios. And even though they weren't putting their name on the production yet, they needed to get promotional materials done while the film was being made. Part of what is called an electronic press kit, or EPK. Basically photos and videos from the making of the film. Sometimes they actually edit it into its own kind of little movie. You probably know it as the making of, or behind the scenes. But for American Me, consistent with his willingness to fight the powers that be, Edward James Olmos wanted something different. He wanted a documentary. Why don't you introduce yourselves and your relationship to American Me?
Well, my name is Andrew Young.
And I'm Susan Todd.
And Susan and I made a documentary about the making of American Me called Lives in Hazard, which featured the lives of actual real gang members that Eddie Olmos hired to be actors in the telling of his story in American Me.
And it was a film that we started actually following the crew as they were making the film. And I think one of the goals that we had when we started that Eddie told us about was he really wanted to make a film about what the lives of these gang members who were in the film was really like. So we went both on set and off set into the lives and homes of these guys mostly.
Well, it's an incredible documentary, and really thank you for being here. Now, you guys, you fools are from Boyle Heights, right? You guys are from Ramona Gardens. You grew up there.
Right.
And no? Oh, where are you guys from?
I grew up in Ohio, and Andy and I have been working together for more than 3 decades making documentary films. And Andy grew up in New York City. And I think the question you might be alluding to is like, how in the heck did we understand what was going on in Boyle Heights? And
that's where I was headed, is how do two folks who are not from even LA, how do you get involved in this? How do you meet Edward James Olmos, and how do you end up getting involved with Lives in Hazard?
It's our job, essay. Sorry, I had to give a little American.
Spoken like someone who spent a lot of time.
The first time that we really were embedded in East LA, it was a very new experience to us. But, as documentary filmmakers, that is kind of what we do. Now, the reason we ended up on this film, this particular project, really has to do more with family history, in that my father, filmmaker Robert Young, has a close personal relationship with Edward James Olmos because actually Eddie acted, his first acting role was in my father's film Alambrista, which I also worked on. That was my first job on a film set. And they have collaborated together on numerous projects since then. And so when Eddie had the opportunity to direct his first feature film, American Me, not only did he seek my father's involvement because they're very close creative collaborators, but Eddie knew that this was going to be a very interesting situation, a potentially explosive situation, and one that had learning possibilities in it. And by then Susan and I were already becoming established as documentary filmmakers, and he said, I want you guys there, filming every minute of this. I'm not going to try to do the Eddie imitation, but suffice it to say, when Eddie asks you to do something, he's pretty convincing.
From what I've been able to gather, some of the things I've heard is first of all, that your father played, and you actually see it in your documentary, played a huge role in the physical filmmaking of this movie. But that also when Edward James Olmos wanted to direct, one of the things that sort of gave the studio, Universal, some made them feel a little more comfortable with the idea of a first-time director was your father's involvement. So I'm wondering if you know, how did they first come to be collaborators in that way? I
think that the film that my father hired Eddie on, called Alambrista, is the story of a Mexican who comes into the United States illegally, an illegal immigrant to work the fields and send money back to his family. I think that Eddie was very taken by the way that my father was making the film, and my father relied on a lot of real people. He had a core team of actors, but there are a lot of real people that my father worked into the film and real situations. And I think Eddie was very inspired by that. And probably said to himself, I want to be making those kinds of films. And so there were numerous projects, and Eddie's an amazing actor, and so my father, hired him in different roles, and so he brought a lot of life to different films of my father's. But I think when Eddie went to direct his own film, I think he just wanted, my father's there, and my father's only too happy to help a friend and collaborate. But it's really Eddie's film. Eddie directed it. My dad was there, I think, to give Eddie some confidence, maybe some ideas now and then. But this was Eddie's film.
Susan, I'm wondering if you could tell me, you guys managed to get some incredible access. What were the kinds of enticements that, what was in it for these gang members, do you think? And how to tell their stories in such a frank way? What was that process like of getting them to open up to you?
Well, I think that I think everybody likes to be heard. And I think that we were in a kind of bubble situation, starting off with the crew. And Andy and I, we like to understand people and are interested in talking to people and hearing about their lives. So we, slowly over the days, we would hang out with different people, and Andy and I would discuss, hey, maybe let's see if we can go with Gil today and see what his neighborhood is like when he's not working as an actor. And that's how we would kind of take people off on their own and have like one-on-one conversations with them. And since everybody in this on the crew was like dealing with this historical situation of American Me's story, it offered people a lot of chance to self-reflect on what gang life was really like and what it is like. And back in the 90s, that's what we were dealing with.
We're headed into probably the hardest point of the shoot. We now know that in the last week, there have been 3 deaths in the 2-block radius in which we're working, none connected with us. We've been very, very fortunate, and we want to just intensify that good luck that we've had by taking some more precautions.
Do you remember, we've heard of like safety talks, for example, that were given on set, right? Do you remember the feeling of, this is something going to go wrong here, and what the general vibe of the crew was like? Were people worried that violence could break out?
Yeah, I think when we were on location in East LA, I was always a little worried about drive-bys because we were a pretty big target, and I'm doing the sound mostly, so of course I'm hyper aware of sirens. I'm hyper aware of cars going by. And, so when we would be out on a sidewalk kind of away from the shooting, talking to one of the gang members who was a character in our film, yeah, I was concerned sometimes when I'd hear a car go by quickly. And this Folsom State Prison is a place where I hope I never have to go back to. That was a really intense environment to be in.
Especially as a woman, I have to imagine, Susan, like, what was that like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was like, I can't even remember what I was wearing, but I was probably wearing like, pants, long pants and a shirt. And I had all my sound equipment on me, which is heavy. And, I'm walking through
So
it.
cocktail attire.
Oh,
basically.
right. That's right. Yeah. Low cut, push-up bra. I'm joking. It was like you walk into the gates, you get searched, and I remember all the sound equipment had to be opened up, and then you walk through another gate and it locks behind you, and then you walk through another gate and then it locks behind you, and you're being escorted by a guard, and then you go into this gigantic open yard where there's hundreds of inmates. And you're like, I was just like, oh, okay, I'm here. Let's start filming, Andy. And we would, people would come up to us. And there were certain inmates that were actually background actors in the film. And they were separated from the regular population. But it was often hard to know, who was who, and people would come up to you. And it was very racially divided. The gangs in prisons are, there's Aryan Brotherhood, there's Mexican Mafia, there's black gangs, and they all are, vying for who's the strongest and who's the toughest and how to protect yourself. And it was a tough environment. It was a really tough environment to work in.
And the ironic thing is that the scariest guys were the white guys, the Aryan Brotherhood dudes. And that's the irony. It was like racially divided, and our race was the scariest.
Right.
And maybe it was just the way that those guys presented themselves, or the tattooing, the body art, the imagery was all pretty terrifying.
Oh, I mean, Nazis are terrifying to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
They're so scary.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a lot of them had Nazi imagery. I remember a guy with a swastika on his forehead, and whereas the Chicanos kind of looked like they could have been, if you put them in a different environment, they wouldn't really stand out to you. But the Aryan Brotherhood, they stood out.
And the comments you would catch. I mean, I would, again, doing sound. I'm like hyper hearing everything, and I would catch these little comments, and I remember just going, okay, I heard that. I'm going to talk to Andy about that after we get out of prison today.
Yeah. And when we interviewed one of the prison authorities.
Who's that? The associate warden, you mean?
Associate warden, yeah.
Anna Olivares, yeah.
Yeah. When Anna says, we're taking a big risk in doing this, you realize that, they think it's dangerous too. And but they felt like it was worth a certain amount of risk because they want to stop people from getting incarcerated in the first place.
I do remember on the yard, the big open yard, there were, people in towers with rifles. And they were, they're on shoot to kill orders. If anybody had messed with us, they would have been in, lockdown for years. That was kind of what the guards told us. So everybody was, tried to be pretty polite.
As far as I know, it's the first time thing ever to happen here, where they have allowed people from the outside to come in and dress as convicts. It made a lot of stress on all the gunners when the situation was occurring. When they first came in, it was no big deal. I seen a green vest. I knew right away that these people must be in the movie, and I was thinking maybe they were going to have them keep those vests on for mingling with the inmate population. When they came off immediately, I lost who they were. I was concerned about if something was to happen and I have to fire my warning shot, would I be firing at an inmate or would I be firing at an actor?
That was a clip of an actual Folsom prison guard recorded by Susan and Andrew for their doc. So we're watching the guard basically struggle with how to avoid shooting an actor as American Me is being filmed at the prison. Coming up, we hear about Andrew and Susan's experience with gang interventionist Ana Lizárraga, who was murdered, allegedly, as a result of her role with American Me. Welcome back to More Than a Movie. I'm Alex Fumero. We're talking to documentary filmmakers Andrew Young and Susan Todd about their experience making a film behind the scenes of American Me.
So I want to go back to East LA. And in particular, one of the folks that you feature in the documentary, Ana Lizárraga, who was credited as an advisor, consultant, and was a known gang interventionist. And I wonder, can you tell me a little bit about what you remember about Ana, what she was like? Tell me what you remember about her.
She was obviously streetwise because she had grown up in that environment, but she also seemed to be really dedicated to reversing the trend. Providing an alternative for kids. It was, I think, revealed in the filming just how intimately she had experience with life on the streets, with drug dealing, with gang activity. But it was also evident how much she wanted to stop that from happening. She was a tough woman. I believe that she really cared about what she was doing.
Yeah, I remember her as being very dedicated to like sitting at the table with the gang members in between shots and scenes, and talking a lot to people, really communicating to people. She was never like sitting back with her feet up. She was really, really engaged in trying to make the film happen. And one scene that I recall that she was in this tiny apartment where her grandson in the film, because she acted in the film too, she played the role of a grandmother. Her grandson is discovered overdosed in the bathroom, and that was a really emotional scene for everybody.
It was very, very true to her and very real. She's lived that moment. Cut.
I deal a lot with ODs or kids that want to die or kids that had died. And whether it's an OD or it's a drive-by shooting or whatever suicide it is, kids are still taking their lives away. They're playing with dynamite and they don't even recognize it.
I think my position in that, I was like balanced on the bathtub, trying to get behind the door, so I could get good sound for it. And it was we were all like sweating because it was really hot. And she didn't have to act that. Her reaction to finding that boy with the overdose, that was real. And it was real for all of us. I remember Eddie crying during that, and just because it was so real.
Did you notice any tension between her and the local gangs? Like, what were their reactions to her?
We didn't really. I didn't see anything like
I didn't.
that.
I thought everybody was working well together.
Yeah, nothing like that was apparent to us.
So she seemed like a respected person in the community there.
Definitely,
she did.
We know from some federal indictments that Ana was actually targeted as early as 1990, before the film comes out or is even in production. Was anything like that? Was sort of the danger of her job ever apparent? Did she ever bring that up, or did anyone on the set ever talk about how dangerous her work was?
Not to us. I didn't know anything about that. In fact, when we learned that she had been killed, it was tragic. I didn't know that at all. I thought that the work that she was doing was having positive results on the set, and she had picked some of the gang members to be actors in the film. I think she'd made some judgments and that they were working well. So it was awful. It was awful.
Lizárraga's death made headlines and was featured on LA newscasts like this one.
Lizárraga was packing for her mother's funeral in Utah. Two masked men rushed to the driveway and opened fire. Police say she was executed.
I mean, you can imagine how being a gang reformer could piss off certain people who feel threatened by, who the gang is the family, and they may take somebody doing work like that as being a sign of disrespect, as if to say the gang is no good. And so it's not that hard to imagine doing that work, trying to get kids out of gangs and being not liked for doing that by other gang members. But we never saw anything that would suggest that. I'm just imagining.
What the reaction was of the folks around the movie, what Edward James Olmos's reaction was, and what your father's reaction was?
I don't remember talking to my father about it. It was very upset. Everybody was very upset. It was a huge tragedy. I think Eddie was very upset about it. Of course, I mean, this is somebody that he relied on to help make the film. I think anybody. I mean, and she was not the only death.
And other actors in the film wound up on drug charges back in prison. I mean, that's one of the things that we feature in Lives in Hazard, is that there are a number of people that can't get out of the gangs.
I went into it thinking about the fact that this was a situation that needed attention. It needed society's attention. There needed to be more investment in these neighborhoods, into the environments the environment that was leading to this situation. The drive-by shootings, the drug dealing. That's what I was thinking about, and my motivation. I think when you go into any situation where you're trying to change something, you're going to piss somebody off because somebody is invested in the way things are. And I think that could very well be the way it was in this situation. I mean, yeah, just like Anna may have had enemies for being a reformer, that someone making a movie that tries to turn kids away from it could bother people too. I don't know that I didn't go into the situation thinking that was a risk. I just went into it saying, at least what we're doing in our film, this is a story that needs to be told.
At that period of time, here we are, 2022, gun violence is everywhere. Kids are getting shot in schools. That's what's on people's minds, because that's what, that's the most horrific thing, one of the most horrific things that's going on. But back then, there was a lot of focus on gangs. Back in the 90s. And, gang shootings, gang violence, especially if you lived around LA. And I think that we were looking at investigating that more deeply and really trying to understand the roots of it. And also, when the film was done, President Clinton introduced it. He gave an introduction to it on NBC when it was broadcast, encouraging people to take a really strong look at this and let's get down to understanding this so we can improve the situation. Which Eddie was really behind getting that broadcast. The Department of Justice pulled out lots of educational material and put funding behind the film. So there was a lot of good work that came out of this. we had an evolution in the process, because when we first got there, as Anya said originally, we were working for Universal doing more of a EPK work. And it was as we were working in the weeks that followed that we really realized that we had a larger movie here, and that Eddie realized that too. And that's when we kind of let loose our documentary style and instincts and move forward, knowing that Universal could always use whatever it was that we were shooting for their EPKs, but that we were after the deeper issue of what does it mean to be in a gang, and what are the people here that are acting in this film, what are their lives really like? And I think I just remember the hotel room scene, because there were probably about 20 people there, and we were like all in one room. And Andy and I arrived, after Eddie had said something like, "You got to get on a plane. You got to get out here. We got to do something here." I think we probably had just finished or wrapped up another film that we were working on. And so it was just a lot of listening, and evaluating what it was that was happening. And at that point, he was still trying to put together what the actual, production design was going to be like, and locations. And, at that point in a film, it's a lot. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of moving. I don't think he even had the whole line of crew members set up at that point.
Yeah, this was just an exciting offer because, like I said, we believed that there was a deeper story here. But I think for the studio, it was just like, okay, who's going to be the EPK crew? And Eddie said, I want Andy and Susan in there.
And I think it's also because it was a very special situation, too. To use real gang members and real prison inmates on location. That hasn't been done. That was never done before.
On that note, I wondered what Susan and Andy's interactions were like with the real gang members and inmates. We'll find out after the break. Welcome back to More Than a Movie, American Me. I wanted to know more about the documentary team's experience interacting with real gang members and inmates. Were these first-time cast members happy to have documentary cameras on them while also shooting a movie for the first time?
I think, I think the film crew and our small crew was always treated with respect. I think that has a lot to do with Eddie being at the helm, that, people probably felt good about the fact that there was, that this was a Chicano coming in to tell their story. Everybody was respectful to us and seemed to feel really good to be being treated with respect by the crew. So it felt like it was working. Not to say that there weren't, risks and concerns filming in the neighborhood, but on the set, people seemed to really be enjoying the experience.
You can literally hear it in the voices of the various extras cast directly from the neighborhood in East LA.
It's great.
It's been tiring, actually.
Yeah.
Tiring.
I have a headache right now, but
I've been here till 5 o'clock in the morning.
This is my first time on a scene, and I didn't know it takes so long just to film a little piece of scene.
And it was long hours too. It was summertime. It was hot, and we were working a lot of times on location in Boyle Heights. We were there at night. Our hours, we would start like at 8 and go until 4 in the morning. So it was a kind of a strange schedule, but that helps everybody, I think, to hang together.
So I want to talk a little bit about Edward James Olmos and your experience of watching him and documenting him as he's making this film. There's a couple of scenes in Lives in Hazard that really pop out to me. The first is the opening scene where he's directing Jacob Vargas and a couple other young actors in what is the final scene in American Me, where the kids are going to do a drive-by. And he seems visibly emotional directing that scene. And we were told by Jacob Vargas that he was a wreck.
Don't worry about a thing. Just pull the trigger, son. It's going to be a little, like you don't know whether you should or you shouldn't, but you know that the pressure's on and you better do it. Okay? And you pick up the gun and then you point it. All right? Okay?
There it comes. Free feet. Right now.
So ridiculous. This is scary.
Do you remember shooting that? And do you remember what his energy kind of was around that scene?
He felt pretty sick, I think, because it was, it's a horrible thing to recreate. You're thinking about all the time about what's really happening. This is a young kid. He's getting terrible peer pressure. He's going to shoot somebody. He's got a gun in his hand, and he doesn't even know who he's going to shoot. I mean, think about that. I mean, that's like the total stupidity of what drive-by shooting is like, and Eddie's recreating it. So he's, in the moment, I remember when we filmed, he was just like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this," because sometimes when you are acting out something, you are aware of just how ridiculous it is and how insane it is. That brought it really to home for all of us too.
Yeah. And the other scene that popped out was there was a 3-year-old kid on the sidewalk, seemingly parents nowhere in sight.
And he's a very tough little boy. He has been on the street for a long, long time.
You sleepy? You want to be in the movie with us? You want to be in the movie with us? See what they're doing here?
It makes you sensitive towards the fact that environment is everything. You can see it. If this child was getting exposed to a person even reading a book, he would accept it.
Don't laugh, okay? Don't laugh, Jojo. Don't laugh. Whatever you do, you're on camera, so don't laugh, okay?
Can you tell me a little bit about that moment, and then how that might reflect how Edward James Olmos felt about the people he was working with, not the professional actors, but the people in the neighborhood?
We were in that particular housing area for a pretty long time. A lot of scenes are shot in that particular housing area where Jojo lived near. Jojo was like the kind of kid who, the ADs were coming up to him and trying to tell him, you got to move your cycle over this way. And he would look at them and say, no way am I going to move my cycle over there. So they had to give him like special kind of encouragement. And I think that, everybody was aware of that. And, Eddie's heart went out to him. Eddie picks him up in our documentary and just tickles him and makes him laugh, and then you really do see that role models can make a huge difference in people's lives.
He's just a kid. He's just a kid like any kid, but environment is so much of how we grow up, what affects us, and he's growing up in a tough environment. So,
Right. And a lot of the guys talk about, in the documentary, it's pretty explicit. They're like, we didn't have role models.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yep.
And so
they did have role models, not necessarily positive role models.
Don't take Andrew's word for it, though. Listen to Jerry Lucero tell it in Lives in Hazard.
A lot of my friends are dead now. I'm one of the ones that's still alive. I'm 32 years old. I'm a rare thing here. When you're older than 30 years old, you're a role model, whether it's positive or negative.
Well, there's one great the Jerry, who's one of the gang counselors who worked really well with a lot of the the gang members when they were like working together from different gangs. He says, when I grew up, I didn't want to go to Stanford. I wanted to go to San Quentin. You know, so his trajectory in his life was, you know, going to prison. That's what he saw as his path. So it's, you know, even us being there, I think, and you know, for the time that we were there, you know, that changed Gil's life.
Can you tell me a little bit about Gil and what you remember about him? Both what we sort of see in the doc, but also kind of behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Well, he came from a smaller gang than the Hazard gang. So I think he was very personable and had kind of a cheery side to his personality. You know, he was happy. His mom made the best tamales of anybody. I remember going to their house and having tamales, and they were delicious. But he was happy to take us around and really show us the territory and where things had happened. And he was real. He was pretty an authentic guy, and I think he was ready for some change.
Yeah, I think like Susan was saying, you know, people tend to like to be heard on a societal level, and Gil was one of those guys that was proud to show. To tell us about his gang, MC Force, to show us how he tags around the neighborhood. And that, for us, that's exciting because people are inviting us into their lives. We often find that we're greeted that way with open arms, as long as we're coming in with the right attitude.
And whether or not American Me made an impact on gang recruitment after its release, we know for sure it changed the life of at least one man, Gil Espinosa.
This is the last time you guys talked to me. The last year, I started working for the casting director, Sally Pearl.
Oh, am I alone here? You two must be studio execs.
I learned a lot, and now I'm here doing a show at the American Renegade Theater. This is where I spend most of my time, you know. I consider them another family. They take me, you know, they accept me for what I am, and I like that, you know.
You got a menu on your back? Whoa.
Nah, it's just my last name.
Gee, that must be a painful initiation, though. Yeah. What's that, MC?
MCF.
What's that?
The gang.
What's it like? What's that mean, like mostly Christian fellas?
If we as a society can't provide them a way out, you know, a legitimate way to earn respect and to better their lives, then they're going to create their own system because everybody needs that. Everybody needs a ladder to climb.
They treated you like you were somebody, not like you were just some scum off the streets, you know, some, you know, gang member and all that. They treated you like you were somebody. They treated me like I was important to them, you know, like I was needed, you know.
On our next episode, we talk to Antoinette Levine, the person responsible for securing the dangerous places that American Me was shot, like Ramona Gardens and Folsom Prison. More Than a Movie American Me is a production of Exile Content Studios in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura Podcast Network and Trojan Horse Media. The show is produced by me, Alex Fumero, at Angry Yuka on the internets, and our senior producer is Nigel Dwara. Our executive producers are Rose Reed, Nando Vila, and Kareem Tapsh. Production assistance from Sabine Jansen, Anna Octavio, and Stella Emmett. Mixing and sound design by Eduardo Albornoz. Our executive producers at iHeart are Giselle Bances and Arlene Santana. For more podcasts, listen to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.